I really don't want to talk about what has been happening to myself for the last 4 years. And in fact, using that experience, I would like to make some suggestions and analyze the situation objectively. Being a court reporter, I have an added advantage of trying to understand the laws and rules and how they are made in Pakistan. I also know that the hate campaign and hate speech that is directed particularly against journalists and journalists like me, where it comes from, and we all know about it. And it comes from the proponents of the so-called fifth generation warfare. And they have trained people like they did train people in Afghanistan, and today they are paying the price for that. So there was another kind of training under fifth generation warfare, and now the same trained people have come back to haunt those people who actually trained them, the trainers. So the trained have turned against the trainers in the name of the fifth generation warfare now. I actually want to talk at the conceptual level of why there is a heated debate on social media rule. I think it's not because some rules are good or some rules are bad, and how they can be amended or changed in the interest of fundamental rights. The issue here is that when you don't have democracy, democratic institutions, where people have the right to free speech, then it is useless to talk about having democratic rules for regulating the social media. It's not, the free speech is not a fundamental right of journalists or media organization. Journalists and media organization are only the eyes and ears of the society. So if we do not have that fundamental right available to common people, then there is no use of journalists having the same right and claiming that this rule can be helpful and that rule cannot be, helpful. So we have to understand that first we have to have the right to free speech for the common people, for the politicians, for the civil society, and obviously when they have this right to free speech, media will automatically have that space that is required to promote this right and promote democratic values. For that, I would say that the first problem with the rules or whatever laws we make is the lack of debate. And this lack of debate is again because the parliament and the political parties are unable to assert their legal rights to legislate. And when we don't have a debate, we don't have an ownership of such rules and laws once they are made. The political parties in their manifestos, they do refer to such fundamental rights, but when it comes to legislation, we have seen how PICA law was made, under whose pressure, under whose threats, and how then those laws are actually interpreted by the courts, and then how those laws are selectively enforced by the law enforcement agencies. Similarly, the regulation of media and society without democratic norms and without democratic structures, and then its enforcement of international standards in such a situation is completely contradictory. Unless we have democratic structures in a country enforcing international ethical standards and trying to prevent hate speech, or for that matter, other unethical statements, it would be self-contradictory. We have an example of society in Iran now. If we start trying to enforce those international standards in Iran, that will be a tool in the hand of the regime to actually further suppress the free speech. International standards only come once you already have this free space available in particular societies, and only then you try to improve that space and quality of that space and expression. through enforcement of international standards. And then I think we need to have this self-regulation and enforcement of ethical regulation, not through state structures but through public opinion. And we can create this public opinion through free debate in the society. And through free debate, we can have private sector actually itself, the civil society and private sector monitoring these social media platforms and monitoring the public opinion on social media. And we can have this concept of developing credibility index for the media organizations. And I think civil society like Nigadat is working with, that can actually on annual basis come up with a research to determine which social media organization or media organization was most credible on the basis of an empirical data that we collect throughout by saying which news media organization gave the maximum correct, truthful news, and which news media organizations were proven to be wrong how many times. So I think such kind of a private initiative can also create a public opinion through which social media operators can be regulated. And then lastly, I think we have to be more specific about what can be said and what should not be said. A lot has been said about hate speech, but I think our media, civil society can compile a list of cases and a list of objectionable observations and statements that need to be avoided at the end of every year. So such kind of specific references to violations of social media ethics, I think can be very useful in promoting self-regulation within the society. And lastly, I would conclude by saying that in this conference, we terribly miss personalities like Asma Jahangir, and this is the best way to give what we call as recognize her services by holding such conferences. And I think people like Iman Mazari, they are carrying forward this legacy of Asma Jahangir. And I must pay tribute to Asma Jahangir and Advocate Iman Mazari and all the civil society actors who are trying to carry forward the legacy. And particularly Iman, I would say, I think she chose to carry forward the legacy of Asma Jahangir and not Imran Khan. Thank you.